The silence in Eleanor Vance's small, meticulously kept house was a heavy shroud, muffling not just sound but emotion. At 38, with kind eyes that often held a distant sadness, Eleanor felt adrift. A recent, profound loss had left an aching void, stripping her days of color and purpose. The quiet of her home, once a comfort, had become a stark reminder of her solitude. Seeking a balm for her fractured spirit and a new direction for her compassionate heart, Eleanor decided to do something she'd contemplated for months: adopt a dog. She arrived at the local animal shelter on a crisp autumn afternoon, the scent of damp leaves mingling with the faint, comforting aroma of disinfectant. The shelter was a symphony of barks and whines, a chorus of hopeful pleas from cages filled with eager, wagging tails. Eleanor walked slowly, her gaze thoughtful, stopping at each enclosure, offering a gentle word or a reassuring touch. She wanted a dog that needed her as much as she needed it, a bond forged in mutual understanding. Then she saw him. He was a large German Shepherd mix, his fur a deep, shadowed black, hence the name the volunteers had given him, Shadow. He sat at the very back of his kennel, facing the wall, his massive body hunched, almost as if trying to disappear. Unlike the other dogs, he made no sound, offered no glance, exhibited no flicker of interest in the passing human traffic. His stillness was profound, unsettling. "That's Shadow," a kind-faced volunteer named Maria said, approaching Eleanor cautiously. "He's been with us for a few months. A rescue. We don't know much about his past, only that he was found severely neglected, almost starved. He's difficult." Maria's voice softened with pity. "He won't eat. Not consistently, anyway. We've tried everything. Hand feeding, different foods, even special veterinary diets. He just refuses. He mostly just sits there. He's incredibly timid. Doesn't interact with other dogs or people much. We think he might have been abused. We're worried we might have to make a hard decision soon." Eleanor's heart ached. She peered closer at Shadow. He was gaunt, his ribs faintly visible beneath his thick fur, but there was a nobility in his posture, even in his retreat, and his eyes. When he finally, reluctantly, turned his head just a fraction, held a depth of sorrow that mirrored her own. They were haunted, yet intelligent, filled with an ancient pain. An undeniable pull, a profound empathy, drew her towards him. It was a recognition of shared brokenness, a silent promise of understanding. "I want to meet him," Eleanor said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. Maria hesitated. "Are you sure, ma'am? He hasn't responded to anyone. We don't want to discourage you. There are many other wonderful dogs here who are desperate for a home." "I'm sure," Eleanor insisted, her gaze unwavering. She felt an instinctual connection, a flicker of hope that this silent, suffering creature held a key to her own healing. Maria, though skeptical, led Eleanor to a quiet, enclosed yard. Shadow was brought in on a leash, his head down, his tail tucked low. He didn't look at Eleanor, didn't sniff her outstretched hand. He simply walked to the furthest corner of the yard and lay down, his back to them, resuming his silent vigil. Eleanor sat down slowly, a few feet away, respecting his space. She didn't speak, didn't try to coax him. She just sat there, breathing with him, offering a quiet, comforting presence. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour. Maria, after a few attempts to engage Shadow, finally left them alone, shaking her head gently. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Eleanor remained. She began to speak, her voice soft, almost a murmur, sharing her own story of loss, of loneliness, of the void that had consumed her. She spoke of her hopes for a new beginning, for purpose, for connection. She didn't expect him to understand, only to listen. And then, a subtle shift. Shadow, slowly, almost imperceptibly, turned his head. His haunted eyes met hers. For the first time, Eleanor saw a spark, a flicker of something beyond despair. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was recognition, connection. The next day, Eleanor returned, and the day after that. Each visit was a slow, deliberate act of patience and empathy. She didn't push, didn't force. She simply was, and gradually, inch by agonizing inch, Shadow began to respond. A twitch of an ear, a momentary glance, a soft sigh. He still refused to eat, but he tolerated her presence. On the 5th day, as Eleanor was about to leave, Shadow did something unprecedented. He lifted his head, his gaze locked onto hers, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he nudged his nose against her outstretched hand. It was a fleeting touch, but it was enough. It was a signal, a silent plea for rescue. Eleanor finalized the adoption papers that very afternoon. The shelter staff, though still cautious, were amazed by Shadow's singular response to her. They had never seen him interact with anyone. Bringing Shadow home was a quiet affair. He walked into the house with the same reserved demeanor, sniffing cautiously at the furniture, his large frame moving with an almost ghost-like silence. Eleanor had prepared a comfortable bed for him in the living room, a bowl of premium kibble waiting. But the familiar pattern continued. Shadow refused to eat. He would sniff the food, perhaps lap at the water, but the kibble remained untouched. Days turned into a week, and Eleanor's worry intensified. His gauntness became more pronounced, his movements slower. She consulted her veterinarian, who found no physical ailments, only extreme stress and psychological trauma. He's shutting down. Eleanor. Dr. Evans had warned, her voice grave. Some rescues, if their past trauma is too severe, just give up. You've done everything you can. Maybe he just needs more time. Or maybe he's telling you something you're not understanding. Eleanor refused to give up. She spent hours researching canine trauma, trying different feeding techniques, creating a quiet, predictable routine for him. She cooked him chicken and rice, offered him wet food, even tried hand-feeding him, sitting patiently on the floor, coaxing him gently. Shadow would turn his head away, a soft whimper escaping his throat, as if the food itself caused him pain, or perhaps triggered a deep-seated fear. One afternoon, almost 2 weeks after his adoption, Eleanor sat on the living room floor, a bowl of freshly cooked salmon in front of Shadow. His ribs were more visible now, his coat dull. Her heart ached with frustration and a desperate fear that she was failing him. "Please, Shadow," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Just a little. Just for me." Shadow looked at the food, then at her. His haunted eyes filled with an unspoken plea. He let out a low, mournful whimper, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of unspeakable sorrow. Then, he slowly, deliberately, turned away from the food bowl. He rose, his movements stiff, and walked to the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. He stood there, nose pressed against the glass, staring intently at a specific, overgrown corner of the yard. His tail gave a single, hesitant wag, almost imperceptible. Then he began to paw at the glass, a soft scratching sound. It was a strange behavior, one Eleanor hadn't seen before. It wasn't a demand to go out to relieve himself. He had just been outside. It was something else. A yearning, a draw, his refusal to eat, his persistent melancholy, and now this inexplicable fascination with a particular spot in the backyard. Eleanor felt a chill creep down her spine. Dr. Evans's words echoed in her mind. Maybe he's telling you something you're not understanding. Eleanor walked to the door, her gaze following Shadow's fixed stare. The corner of the yard was overgrown with wild bushes and thorny weeds, a neglected patch that had always seemed innocuous. But to Shadow, it was clearly more than just a patch of dirt. He let out another soft whimper, pawing more insistently at the glass. He wasn't hungry for food. He was hungry for something else, something buried. The peculiar behavior of Shadow, his resolute refusal to eat, and his intensifying obsession with that particular spot in the backyard, gnawed at Eleanor. It wasn't merely the concern for his physical well-being anymore. It was a burgeoning sense of unease, a feeling that something unspoken, something profoundly significant, lay hidden beneath the surface of his strange actions. "Doctor." Evans's words echoed in her mind. "Maybe he's telling you something you're not understanding." Eleanor was determined to understand. She spent the next few days observing Shadow with a meticulous attention she usually reserved for complex puzzles at work. He'd spend hours by the glass door, nose pressed against the cool pane, his eyes fixed on the overgrown corner. Sometimes, he'd let out soft, mournful whimpers, sounds laden with an ancient sorrow. Other times, he'd scratch insistently at the glass, a frantic, desperate plea. When Eleanor let him out, he'd go straight to that spot, sniffing the ground with an almost frantic intensity, then pawing gently, rhythmically, as if trying to uncover something just beneath the soil. He never dug deep, just scraped at the surface, whimpering. He seemed almost afraid to dig further, as if disturbed by what he sensed. Eleanor tried to engage him away from the spot. She bought him new toys, squeaky balls, chew ropes, anything to distract him. She'd take him for long walks, hoping to tire him out, to shift his focus. He'd walk obediently by her side, a phantom of a dog. But the moment they returned home, his gaze would immediately fixate on that corner of the yard. The food, untouched in his bowl, was a constant, stark reminder of his strange, selective hunger. He was weakening, visibly. His ribs were more defined, his once lustrous black coat now dull, his movements lethargic. One evening, as dusk settled over the quiet neighborhood, Eleanor sat on the porch swing, watching Shadow. He was at his usual post, nose to the ground, a low, guttural whine rumbling in his chest. The air was still, save for the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Suddenly, Shadow stopped pawing. He lifted his head, his ears perked, his body rigid. He let out a sharp, insistent bark, a sound Eleanor hadn't heard from him since he arrived. It was a bark of alarm, a warning. Eleanor stood up, her heart pounding. "Shadow, what is it?" He barked again, louder this time, his eyes fixed on the overgrown bushes. He then took a few steps backward, looking at Eleanor, then back at the bushes, as if urging her to see something, to understand. Eleanor walked slowly towards the corner, her mind racing. Was it an animal, a trespasser? As she drew closer, the air grew colder, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted towards her. It was earthy, damp, but with an underlying hint of something metallic, something old and decaying. Her apprehension deepened. She parted the thick, thorny branches of the overgrown hydrangeas. The ground beneath was dark, compacted, and surprisingly flat. There was no visible sign of disturbance, no fresh digging, no obvious anomaly. Yet, Shadow continued to whine, his body trembling, his eyes wide and fixed on the very spot where Eleanor now stood. He nudged her leg with his nose, then pawed at her hand, desperately trying to convey his message. Eleanor knelt, placing her hand on the cold earth. The ground felt unusually firm, almost solid, beneath the thin layer of topsoil. It was as if something large and flat lay buried just inches below the surface. She began to prod at the soil with her fingers, feeling a subtle resistance. Her fingernails scraped against something hard, unyielding. A shiver went down her spine. This wasn't just dirt and roots. This was something else entirely. Shadow, sensing her discovery, let out a mournful howl that sent goosebumps prickling on Eleanor's arms. It was a sound of profound grief, a lament for something lost, something deeply sorrowful. Determined to uncover the source of Shadow's distress, Eleanor hurried back inside, grabbed a small gardening trowel, and returned to the spot. The last rays of sunlight were fading, casting long, eerie shadows across the yard. Shadow sat beside her, his body rigid with anticipation, his gaze fixed on the spot where she began to dig. The soil was surprisingly easy to break through for the first few inches, loose and disturbed. But then, her trowel hit something solid, a dense, unyielding object. She scraped away more dirt, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and growing curiosity. The object was flat, smooth, and oddly shaped. As she cleared away more soil, the outline of what appeared to be a wooden box, or perhaps a small casket, began to emerge. It was old, weathered, and deeply embedded in the earth. Shadow let out a series of frantic whines, pacing back and forth, his tail low, his agitation palpable. He looked at the uncovered object, then back at Eleanor, his eyes conveying a desperate urgency. Eleanor's hands trembled as she continued to dig, her breath catching in her throat. The box was rectangular, about 2 feet long, and surprisingly well preserved despite the damp soil. As she finally managed to clear enough dirt to lift it, her fingers brushed against a cold, metallic object nestled beside the box. She pulled it free. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, delicate and ornate, with intricate floral engravings. Its chain was broken, snapped cleanly in two. She tried to open it, but the clasp was stiff, refusing to yield. Her eyes scanned the locket, searching for any inscription, any clue. There was none, just the beautiful, aged silver. Beside the locket, half buried in the loosened soil, was something else. A small, wooden block, no larger than a child's hand. It was intricately carved with what looked like a stylized bird, a robin, perhaps, perched on a branch. The wood was smooth, worn, as if it had been played with countless times. It was clearly a child's toy. Eleanor stared at the items in her hand, the tarnished locket, the child's wooden toy block. A cold dread seeped into her bones. This wasn't a hidden treasure. This was something else entirely. Something with a story, a history, buried deep beneath her peaceful suburban backyard. Shadow, seeing the items fully exposed, let out a low, mournful howl that ripped through the twilight. It was a sound of profound sorrow, a wail of release, as if a great weight had been lifted from his soul. He then looked at Eleanor, his haunted eyes meeting hers, and for the first time since she had brought him home, he walked slowly towards his untouched food bowl. He sniffed it tentatively. Then, to Eleanor's astonishment, he lowered his head and took a small, deliberate bite of kibble. Then another, and another. The act was profoundly symbolic. He had found what he was looking for, or rather, he had guided Eleanor to it. His hunger, it seemed, was not for food, but for the truth, for a secret to be uncovered. Eleanor, still reeling from the discovery, watched Shadow eat with tears stinging her eyes. The dog, who had refused every morsel for weeks, was now eating, his body trembling, but his hunger finally being sated. She clutched the locket and the wooden block, their weight in her palm feeling heavy with untold stories. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her house, her quiet, suburban home, had a history, a secret, and Shadow, the broken-hearted dog rescued from the shelter, was the silent, intelligent guardian of that truth, leading her on a path she never could have anticipated. The mystery of his refusal to eat was now clear. He was not just starving, he was waiting for someone to listen, to understand, to help him reveal the long-buried secret of the backyard. And Eleanor, unwittingly, had become his reluctant accomplice in a journey to uncover a truth that had been hidden for decades. The wooden toy block and the tarnished silver locket lay on Eleanor's kitchen counter, stark and unsettling against the polished granite. Shadow, no longer refusing food, ate his kibble with a newfound vigor, though he still cast anxious glances towards the backyard. His hunger seemed to have been satiated by the simple act of the items being unearthed. But for Eleanor, a different kind of hunger had awakened a desperate need to understand. The more she looked at the child's toy, the more a sense of profound sadness settled over her. The intricate carving of the robin on the branch was clearly the work of a skilled hand, imbued with a personal touch. This wasn't a mass-produced toy. It was unique, cherished, and the locket, small and delicate, hinted at a secret kept, perhaps a life lost. Her first thought was the police, but what would she tell them? My rescue dog, who refused to eat for weeks, led me to these buried items in my backyard, and now he's eating. It sounded absurd, a story straight out of a bizarre dream. She needed more than a dog's intuition. She needed concrete information, a tangible link to the past. Eleanor remembered the old adage about local libraries and historical societies being treasure troves of forgotten stories. Her house was old, built in the early 1900s, and she knew that such properties often held rich histories. With the wooden block and the locket carefully wrapped in a soft cloth, she drove to the local historical society, a charming, somewhat dusty building tucked away on a tree-lined street. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and quiet reverence. She was greeted by Mr. Harrison, a meticulously dressed man in his late 70s, with spectacles perched on the end of his nose and eyes that sparkled with intellectual curiosity. He was the society's resident historian, renowned for his encyclopedic knowledge of the town's past. Eleanor explained her unusual discovery, omitting the more fantastical details about Shadow's role, simply stating that she was digging in her backyard and found the items. She unwrapped the cloth, presenting the block and the locket. Mr. Harrison picked up the wooden block, his nimble fingers tracing the intricate carving. His eyes widened, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Well, he murmured, his voice laced with a mixture of recognition and awe. "This carving, it's quite distinctive. I haven't seen anything like it in decades, not outside of the old Blackwood Estate records." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Blackwood Estate. Mr. Harrison nodded, his gaze distant, lost in memory. "Yes, the Blackwoods. A very prominent family in this town, back in the early to mid-20th century. Wealthy, influential, though somewhat reclusive. They owned this very property. Mrs. Vance, your house, in fact, was their family home. Built in 1910, if memory serves." He peered at her over his spectacles. "A lovely old place, though it's changed hands many times since." He then picked up the silver locket, examining its delicate craftsmanship. This locket also looks consistent with the period of their residency. The craftsmanship, it speaks of a certain era, a certain family heirloom quality. Eleanor felt a shiver. Her house had belonged to this mysterious Blackwood family, and they had owned these items. "Do you know anything about them? Did they have children?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Harrison sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of forgotten sorrows. "They did. A daughter, a beautiful, vivacious little girl named Lily Blackwood. She was a bit of an enigma, very bright, very curious. She loved to explore, to play in the gardens, and she had a collection of these hand-carved wooden toys. Her father, a hobbyist woodworker, made them for her." He pointed to the robin. This was one of her favorites. She called it Robin Redbreast. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Lily, what happened to her?" Mr. Harrison's expression grew solemn. That Mrs. Vance is where the story turns tragic. Lily Blackwood. She vanished, disappeared without a trace, from this very house, when she was just 7 years old. It was a scandal, a tragedy that rocked this town to its core. Decades ago, mind you. Back in 1947, if I recall correctly. Eleanor felt a cold dread seep into her bones. 1947. 76 years ago. A missing child. A cold case. And a dog. Shadow. Whose grief seemed inextricably linked to this decades-old mystery. The police investigated. Of course. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice low. But they found nothing. No body. No ransom note. No suspects. The Blackwoods were distraught. The town whispered about an abduction, or worse. But without any evidence, the case simply went cold. The Blackwoods, heartbroken and hounded by the whispers, sold the house quietly a few years later and moved away, never to be heard from again. It was a dark cloud over this community for many years. He looked at the locket, then back at Eleanor. The empty locket. It's poignant. Isn't it a symbol of something lost? Something never filled? Eleanor clutched the items. This was it. This was Shadow's secret. He hadn't been starving. He had been grieving. He hadn't been digging for bones, but for closure. He had been trying to tell her about Lily Blackwood. Did anyone ever suspect foul play, Eleanor asked, her mind racing. A family member, or something else. Mr. Harrison hesitated. Well, there were always rumors. Whispers. The Blackwoods were very private people. Some said the family was fractured. Lily's mother had passed away a few years before Lily disappeared, and her father had remarried. His new wife, Evelyn Thorne, a distant cousin, as I recall, was a very stern woman. There were whispers that she found Lily to be difficult, a handful, but that's all they were. Mrs. Vance. Whispers. Nothing concrete. Eleanor felt a jolt. Evelyn Thorne. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity, though she couldn't immediately place it. It was a common name. After all. Still, the hint of family discord, of a child being deemed problematic, sent a shiver down her spine. Do you have any records about the original investigation? Eleanor asked, her voice firm with newfound resolve. Newspaper clippings, police reports. Mr. Harrison nodded, his eyes bright with a shared sense of purpose. He understood now that Eleanor wasn't just a curious homeowner. She was a seeker of truth. We have some archives. It's an old case. But I keep meticulous records. Come, let's see what we can find. They spent the rest of the afternoon poring over dusty newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and brittle documents. The articles painted a picture of a desperate search, a community in mourning, and ultimately, a case abandoned to the passage of time. The official police reports were brief, lacking in detail, almost as if the investigation had been perfunctory. Eleanor noted the lack of focus on the stepmother, Evelyn Thorne, despite the local whispers. The influential Blackwood family seemed to have had a hand in controlling the narrative. As they dug deeper, Eleanor noticed something peculiar in one of the old property records, a hastily drawn, incomplete sketch of the house's original layout, distinct from the official blueprints. In one corner, almost as an afterthought, there was a faint, penciled mark in the cellar area, labeled simply storage. It was too vague to be significant on its own, but combined with Shadow's intense focus on the backyard and the quick sale of the property after Lily's disappearance, it sparked a new line of thought. Mr. Harrison, Eleanor said, pointing to the faint mark on the sketch. Do you have any more detailed plans of the house? Perhaps earlier versions. This doesn't seem to match the official blueprints I have. Mr. Harrison rummaged through an old box. Ah, yes. The original architectural drawings. These were from the first owner, before any renovations. He pulled out a large, rolled-up parchment, its edges yellowed with age. As they unrolled the old blueprint, Eleanor's eyes immediately went to the cellar. And there it was. A section of the cellar, distinctly marked, with a note, "Future wine cellar," to be walled off. But the dimensions on the blueprint were different from what she knew of her current cellar. It suggested a space that had been either extended or, more chillingly, walled off. The implications were terrifying. A missing child, a hastily sold house, a neglectful stepmother, a dog with an inexplicable connection to a specific spot in the backyard, and now, a hidden, walled-off space in the cellar, potentially created after the initial construction. Eleanor felt a cold certainty wash over her. This was no ordinary cold case. This was a story of a child, a hidden secret, and a truth waiting decades to be unearthed. Shadow hadn't just led her to a buried toy and locket. He had led her to a cry for justice, echoing from the past. And Eleanor, the woman who had sought purpose, had found it, intertwined with the destiny of a forgotten child and a loyal dog. The hunt for answers had just truly begun. Eleanor left the Historical Society that evening with a mind buzzing with fragments of a forgotten tragedy. The image of Lily Blackwood, a bright-eyed child vanishing into thin air, haunted her. The small wooden block and the tarnished locket, now nestled safely in her purse, felt like tangible links to a decades-old injustice. Shadow, sensing the shift in her resolve, seemed to mirror her intensity. He ate with more consistency, his eyes holding a newfound alertness, as if he knew their shared quest had just begun. The next few days were a blur of research. Eleanor, with Mr. Harrison's invaluable guidance, delved deeper into the Blackwood family history. They scoured old town records, property deeds, and dusty archives. Mr. Harrison, a walking encyclopedia of local lore, provided context and anecdotal whispers that never made it into official reports. He recounted tales of the Blackwoods' immense wealth, their social standing, and the fierce protectiveness with which they guarded their privacy. The Blackwoods were incredibly influential. Mr. Harrison explained one afternoon, sifting through microfiche in the library. They practically built this town's textile industry. Money bought them a lot of silence. Mrs. Vance, especially back then. A missing child is always a tragedy. But when it happens to a family like that, in a house like yours, well, sometimes inconvenient truths get buried. Eleanor nodded, a chill running down her spine. The inconvenient truth was exactly what she was searching for. Their investigation revealed disturbing inconsistencies in the original police report from 1947. The investigation seemed to have been surprisingly brief, almost cursory, for a missing child case. There were no in-depth interviews with the stepmother, Evelyn Thorne, beyond a basic statement. No extensive search of the property, despite the house being a large, isolated estate. It was as if the official narrative had been quickly established and then left unchallenged. It's like they wanted to close the case as quickly as possible, Eleanor mused, poring over a faded police transcript. No follow-up on leads, no real effort to question the family's sudden decision to sell and move away. Mr. Harrison tapped a finger on the transcript. Exactly. And Evelyn Thorne, the stepmother. She was a formidable woman, highly respected in certain social circles, even after Lily's disappearance. She became a prominent figure in charity work, founded several philanthropic organizations after moving to the city, a pillar of society, by all accounts. His voice held a note of skepticism. The more they uncovered about Evelyn Thorne, the more a sense of unease settled over Eleanor. The woman presented an image of impeccable benevolence, yet the whispers from the past painted a picture of a stern, perhaps even cruel, stepmother who considered Lily a burden. The contrast was jarring, and Eleanor's intuition screamed that this was where the real secret lay. Shadow, meanwhile, seemed to react to their research. When Eleanor would read aloud passages about Lily or about Evelyn Thorne, He would sit up, his ears perked, a low, guttural growl sometimes rumbling in his chest. He was particularly agitated by the mention of Evelyn. It was as if he recognized the name, or perhaps the malevolence it represented. He would pace restlessly around the living room, his gaze constantly drawn to the backyard, to the spot where he had led Eleanor to dig. His anxiety, while less severe than his initial refusal to eat, was a constant barometer of the truth they were uncovering. One evening, while researching Lily Blackwood's birth records, Eleanor stumbled upon a peculiar detail. Lily had inherited a considerable trust fund from her biological mother, a fund that would have been fully accessible upon her 21st birthday. If Lily had truly vanished, that trust fund would have eventually reverted to her legal guardian, or, failing that, to certain designated relatives. And who was the most prominent relative benefiting from the Blackwood family's fortune after Lily's disappearance? Evelyn Thorne. "This is it. Mr. Harrison," Eleanor declared, her voice firm, holding up the document. "Motive. Evelyn Thorne stood to gain financially if Lily was out of the picture. And she was the last one with Lily, living in this house." Mr. Harrison's eyes widened. "Good heavens. Mrs. Vance, this changes everything. It elevates mere whispers to something far more tangible." Their investigation took a more focused turn. They started looking into Evelyn Thorne's early life, her financial situation before marrying Lily's father, and the rapid expansion of her charitable foundations after the Blackwood family's relocation. They found evidence of extravagant spending, sudden acquisitions, and a lifestyle that seemed to far outpace her known income at the time. It suggested a hidden source of wealth, perhaps Lily's trust fund. The most disturbing discovery, however, came from the old architectural plans Eleanor had obtained from Mr. Harrison earlier. The faint penciled mark in the cellar, labeled storage, became an obsession. Eleanor had measured her current cellar against the original blueprint, and there was indeed a discrepancy. A section of the cellar, approximately 10 x 10 feet, was inexplicably missing from her current home's layout. It had been walled off at some point, after the original construction, but before the house changed hands multiple times. Eleanor visited her cellar, a cool, damp space filled with dusty boxes and forgotten items. She paced the perimeter, tapping on the walls, listening for any hollow sounds. In one corner, behind a stack of old gardening tools, her knuckles hit a spot that felt strangely different. Solid, but with a faint, almost imperceptible line that suggested a hidden seam. It was a section of the wall that looked like it had been bricked over, skillfully blended with the existing masonry to appear seamless. But to Eleanor's now trained eye, it was glaringly obvious. Shadow, who had followed her down into the cellar, began to whine, his body tense. He pawed frantically at the section of the wall, his nose sniffing at the cracks, a low, persistent growl rumbling in his chest. He was terrified, yet driven. It was the same desperation she had seen in the backyard, amplified by the confined space and the oppressive stillness of the cellar. He was not just reacting to a scent, he was reacting to memory, to the lingering energy of what had happened there. Eleanor placed her hand on the cold, rough bricks. The air felt heavy, stale. A chilling realization washed over her. Lily Blackwood hadn't vanished. She had been hidden. And the secret was not in the backyard, but beneath the house itself. The backyard was where Shadow had picked up the initial scent of Lily's toys, perhaps where she had played last before her disappearance, or where something related to her confinement was disposed of. But the true location of the dark secret was in the cellar. She remembered the local whispers. Mr. Harrison had mentioned Evelyn Thorne found Lily to be difficult, a handful. What if difficult meant a child too curious, too free-spirited, too intelligent to be easily controlled, especially when her future inheritance was at stake? What if Evelyn had tried to silence Lily, to hide her away, to control her inheritance? The thought was monstrous, but terrifyingly plausible. Eleanor knew she couldn't proceed alone. She needed help, proper authority. But how to convince them, a missing child cold case from 1947 based on a dog's strange behavior and some old blueprints. It sounded insane. She needed a plan, a way to present her evidence convincingly. She looked at Shadow, who was still frantically pawing at the hidden wall, his distress palpable. He had brought her this far. He had shown her the truth. Now, it was up to her to unveil it to the world. The kind-hearted woman seeking solace had become an accidental detective, driven by the unspoken plea of a forgotten child and the unwavering loyalty of a broken dog. The fight for Lily Blackwood's justice was about to begin. The hidden wall in the cellar loomed, a silent testament to a decades-old deception. Eleanor's mind reeled with the implications. A child, possibly trapped, definitely silenced. The wealthy Blackwood family, the quick sale of the house, and the conveniently perfunctory police investigation. It all coalesced into a chilling narrative of a cover-up, orchestrated by someone powerful and ruthless. And all signs pointed to Evelyn Thorne. Eleanor knew she couldn't just go to the police with her theory based on a dog's intuition, an old blueprint, and a hunch about a hidden wall. She needed irrefutable proof, something that would compel them to act on a cold case from 1947. Her first step was to carefully document everything. She took dozens of photographs of the cellar wall, noting the subtle differences in masonry, the faint seam. She meticulously compared the original blueprint with her current home's layout, highlighting the missing section. Shadow became her constant companion, his presence a living barometer of the truth. When Eleanor was near the walled-off section, he would become agitated, whining softly, sniffing at the bricks. When she was elsewhere, discussing her findings with Mr. Harrison, he would remain alert, his eyes following her every move, as if urging her forward. His hunger for food was now consistent, a sign of his growing trust and the shared purpose that bound them. Eleanor and Mr. Harrison spent countless hours cross-referencing their findings. They discovered that Evelyn Thorne, after moving from the town, had indeed become a prominent figure in the city's philanthropic circles. She chaired numerous charitable boards, her name synonymous with generosity and social responsibility. This public image, however, starkly contrasted with the chilling details emerging from their investigation, the timing of Lily's trust fund inheritance, the hurried sale of the Blackwood estate, and the whispers of Evelyn's disdain for Lily. "It's the perfect camouflage. Mrs. Vance?" Mr. Harrison observed one afternoon, shaking his head. "Who would suspect a woman dedicated to charity of such a monstrous act?" "Someone who understood the power of reputation and the art of misdirection," Eleanor countered, a determined glint in her eye. She built an entire persona to bury her past. Their breakthrough came when they found an old, barely legible letter tucked away in a misfiled box at the Historical Society. It was a correspondence from Lily Blackwood's maternal grandmother to a distant relative, dated a few months after Lily's disappearance. The grandmother expressed her deep anguish, but also a profound suspicion regarding Evelyn Thorne. The letter contained a cryptic line Evelyn always said Lily was difficult and needed to be contained. I fear she took those words too literally. It was not direct evidence, but it was a crucial piece of the puzzle, reinforcing the motive and Evelyn's character. Eleanor knew it was time to present their findings to the authorities. She reached out to Detective Reynolds, a seasoned cold case investigator she'd read about in the local newspaper. He had a reputation for persistence and an open mind. Eleanor booked an appointment, steeling herself for skepticism. The meeting with Detective Reynolds was tense. Eleanor laid out her evidence, the architectural discrepancies, the family history, the financial motives, the grandmother's letter, and the inexplicable behavior of her dog, Shadow. She presented it logically, calmly, as if building a case in a courtroom. She even brought a video she'd recorded of Shadow's agitated behavior in the cellar, his frantic pawing at the hidden wall. Detective Reynolds listened patiently, his face unreadable. He examined the old blueprints, comparing them to the current house schematics. He read the grandmother's letter, his brow furrowed in concentration. He watched the video of Shadow, a flicker of intrigue in his eyes. He was a man of logic, but he couldn't deny the compelling, if unconventional, nature of the evidence. "Mrs. Vance," Detective Reynolds finally said, leaning back in his chair. "This is certainly unorthodox. A dog leading you to a 70-year-old cold case, based on a hidden wall and family whispers." He paused, a wry smile playing on his lips. "I've seen stranger things in this job, but not by much." Eleanor braced herself for dismissal. However, Reynolds continued, his voice serious. "The architectural inconsistencies are compelling, and the financial motive, combined with this letter, creates a credible suspicion. We can't ignore this, especially with a missing child involved." Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So, you'll investigate?" "We'll start with a forensic examination of that wall in your cellar," Detective Reynolds confirmed. "If there's a hidden compartment or any evidence of a past structure, we'll find it. And if we find anything, Mrs. Thorne will be brought in for questioning." His eyes held a newfound respect for Eleanor's tenacity. "You've done remarkable work, Mrs. Vance, and your dog. He certainly has a nose for secrets." The next few days were excruciating for Eleanor. The police obtained a search warrant, and a small team of forensic investigators arrived at her home. Their presence a stark contrast to the quiet suburban peace. Shadow, sensing the gravity of the situation, stayed close to Eleanor, his body tense but resolute. He watched the investigators with a piercing gaze, as if overseeing their every move. The specialists carefully examined the wall in the cellar. They used ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and meticulous visual inspection. After several hours, the lead forensic technician confirmed what Eleanor had suspected. "There's a significant anomaly here, Detective," the technician announced, tapping a section of the wall. "The brickwork is consistent with the original structure, but the mortar in this particular section is different, newer, and the radar shows a distinct cavity behind it. It looks like a sealed-off room, or at least a very large compartment." Detective Reynolds' face tightened. "All right, we have probable cause. Get a team ready to open it up. Carefully." The moment of truth had arrived. Eleanor stood back, her heart pounding, as the team began to carefully dismantle the section of the wall. The sound of chisels against mortar echoed through the cellar, each chip of brick a testament to the decades of silence that were about to be broken. Shadow whined softly, his body trembling, his eyes fixed on the crumbling wall. As the bricks were removed, revealing a dark, cavernous space behind them, the air in the cellar grew cold, stagnant. A wave of dust and the faint scent of old paper wafted out. Detective Reynolds shone his flashlight into the darkness. It wasn't a grave, but a small, hidden room, no larger than a closet. Inside, the light revealed a small, dusty cot, a child's worn blanket, and a rickety wooden table. On the table, nestled amidst a scattering of dried leaves and cobwebs, lay a small, leather-bound book. It was a diary, and beside it, a faded, handwritten letter. Detective Reynolds, his face grim, carefully stepped into the hidden compartment. He picked up the diary, its cover brittle with age. He opened it to the first page, and the words, written in a child's neat, looping hand, brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "My name is Lily Blackwood. I am 7 years old. I am in the dark room. Aunt Evelyn says I am difficult. She says I must stay here until I learn to be good. I miss Mama and Papa. I miss my Robin." Eleanor gasped, a sob catching in her throat. The Robin. The wooden toy. It was all real. Lily had been confined. Not vanished. Not abducted. Confined. By her own aunt, Evelyn Thorne. Detective Reynolds continued to read, his voice low and solemn, detailing Lily's days of isolation, her loneliness, her longing for her parents. The diary entries revealed Lily's spirit, her resilience, even in captivity. And then, at the very end, there was a final, desperate entry, written in a shaky hand, describing an attempt to escape through a hidden passage she had discovered in the wall, a secret escape route her biological mother had shown her as a child. Beside the diary lay the letter. It was from Lily's mother, written shortly before her death, a final message to her daughter, revealing the existence of the secret passage and warning her of Evelyn Thorne's true nature, urging Lily to be careful. It described Evelyn's jealousy and manipulative tendencies, especially concerning the inheritance. The truth, buried for decades, had finally been brought to light. Evelyn Thorne, the benevolent charity leader, was a monster. She hadn't killed Lily, but she had confined her, hoping to remove her from the inheritance line, or simply to silence a child she deemed inconvenient. The fate of Lily after her escape attempt was still unknown, but the diary and letter were undeniable proof of Evelyn Thorne's cruelty and the years of deception. Shadow, sensing the revelations, let out a soft whine, then gently nudged Eleanor's hand with his head. His eyes, no longer haunted, seemed to hold a flicker of peace. The secret was out. Lily's voice, after all these years, would finally be heard. The revelation of Lily Blackwood's diary sent a chilling wave through Detective Reynolds and his team. The raw, desperate words of a 7-year-old girl, confined in the hidden depths of what was now Eleanor's home, painted a horrifying picture of neglect and cruelty. The accompanying letter from Lily's mother, a desperate plea from the grave, confirmed Evelyn Thorne's insidious nature and her malicious intent. The pieces of the decades-old puzzle were finally falling into place, exposing a truth far more sinister than a mere disappearance. Eleanor, emotionally drained but resolute, watched as the forensic team meticulously collected every item from the hidden compartment, the cot, the blanket, the small table, and most importantly, Lily's diary and her mother's letter. Shadow, now calmer, lay by Eleanor's feet, his gaze fixed on the opened wall, as if bearing silent witness to the justice unfolding. His long-held secret was finally out. Detective Reynolds immediately dispatched a team to locate Evelyn Thorne. The benevolent charity leader, now in her 90s, was living a life of quiet luxury in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, revered by many for her philanthropic contributions. The contrast between her public persona and the monster revealed in Lily's diary was stark and profoundly disturbing. The arrest of Evelyn Thorne was swift and discreet, avoiding a media circus that might compromise the investigation. However, the news quickly leaked, sending shockwaves through the city's elite. The whispers of a long-forgotten scandal suddenly roared back to life, fueled by the horrifying details emerging from the police investigation. Evelyn Thorne, frail but with eyes that still held a flicker of their old sternness, initially denied everything. She claimed senility, confusion, and dismissed the diary as a child's fantasy. But Detective Reynolds, armed with the irrefutable evidence of the hidden room, the authenticated diary entries, and the corroborating letter, pressed on. He laid out the financial motive, the rapid sale of the Blackwood estate, and the convenient timing of Lily's trust fund inheritance. He highlighted the manipulative nature described in the mother's letter, matching the chilling reality of Lily's confinement. The interrogation was long and arduous. Evelyn, a master of deception, tried every trick in the book, feigned ignorance, emotional manipulation, and outright lies. But Reynolds was relentless, peeling back the layers of her carefully constructed facade. He showed her photographs of the rediscovered wooden robin, the very toy Lily had lamented missing in her diary. He played the video of Shadow's frantic distress at the hidden wall, explaining the dog's undeniable connection to the buried secret. The sheer weight of the evidence, coupled with the psychological pressure, began to chip away at her composure. Finally, after hours of relentless questioning, the facade cracked. Evelyn Thorne, exhausted and cornered, crumbled. Her voice, once imperious, became a thin, reedy whisper as she confessed. She hadn't killed Lily, she insisted, but she had indeed confined her. Lily was a difficult child, too wild, too disobedient, too much like her free-spirited mother who had died young. Evelyn had feared Lily would squander her inheritance, and perhaps, more selfishly, feared the child would expose Evelyn's own manipulative schemes within the family. She had kept Lily hidden in the secret room, intending to re-educate her, to mold her into the compliant heiress Evelyn desired. The diary, however, revealed Lily's spirit. It detailed her discovery of a hidden escape route, a small, cleverly disguised passage in the back of the hidden room that led to an old, unused drainage tunnel beneath the house. A secret passage her adventurous biological mother had shown her years ago as a fun game, a secret hideaway. The last entry described Lily's desperate attempt to use this escape route, her hope for freedom. Evelyn, in her confession, confirmed this. She admitted that one morning, she had found the hidden room empty, the secret passage ajar. Lily was gone. Evelyn, terrified of exposure and the loss of the inheritance, had sealed off the passage in the room, quickly sold the house, and fabricated the story of Lily's disappearance, hoping the truth would remain buried forever. She had then used Lily's trust fund, accessible through a legal loophole after a set period of her being deemed missing, to build her philanthropic empire, laundering her ill-gotten gains through charity. The final piece of Lily's fate was revealed by Evelyn. Lily had indeed escaped that night, making her way through the old tunnels. But Evelyn, consumed by panic, had hired a private investigator to track her down. The investigator found Lily a few days later, weak and disoriented, miles from home. Instead of returning her to her father, Evelyn, fearing the unraveling of her scheme, had bribed the investigator to take Lily to a remote, isolated orphanage under a false name, far away from any familiar connections. The investigator, a man named Silas Croft, had done as he was told, securing Lily's silence with threats and the promise of a small payment to the orphanage. Lily's father, heartbroken and convinced of his daughter's tragic disappearance, never knew the truth. This revelation, the final agonizing piece of the puzzle, opened a new avenue of investigation. While Evelyn Thorne faced charges for child endangerment, conspiracy to defraud, and obstruction of justice, Detective Reynolds immediately launched a search for Silas Croft in the records of that remote orphanage. Eleanor, learning of Lily's fate, felt a complex mix of emotions: grief for Lily's lost childhood, fury at Evelyn's cruelty, and a profound sense of hope. Lily was alive, somewhere. Her story wasn't just a tragedy, but a testament to a child's unwavering will to survive. Shadow, sensitive to Eleanor's emotions, nudged her hand, his eyes now bright with a newfound light. His refusal to eat, his persistent whimpers, his desperate pawing at the earth, it had all been a plea for Lily. He had sensed her presence, her history, and her enduring spirit trapped within the confines of the house. He was not just a dog. He was a silent, loyal witness to a crime, a living connection to a buried secret. The story of Lily Blackwood, propelled by the relentless efforts of Eleanor and the uncanny intuition of Shadow, became a national sensation. It exposed not just one woman's cruelty, but the dark underbelly of power and privilege, and the lengths to which some would go to protect their secrets. The news brought forward others who had known Evelyn Thorne, or had suspected her true nature, but had been too intimidated to speak. As the legal proceedings against Evelyn Thorne commenced, Eleanor stood firm, ready to testify, to ensure that Lily's voice, finally heard after decades of silence, would lead to definitive justice. The quiet woman who had sought solace in a rescue dog had found herself at the center of a historical crime. A relentless seeker of truth, guided by the remarkable loyalty and unspoken wisdom of her four-legged companion. The resolution of Lily's mystery, however, was only just beginning. The confession of Evelyn Thorne, coupled with the chilling details from Lily's diary and her mother's letter, ignited a media storm. The story of Lily Blackwood, the child confined and then disappeared, became a national sensation, a heartbreaking tale of long-buried injustice finally brought to light. Public outrage swelled, demanding swift and uncompromising justice for Evelyn Thorne. Detective Reynolds, with the unwavering support of Eleanor and Mr. Harrison, diligently pursued the new lead, Silas Croft, the private investigator who had taken Lily to a remote orphanage. It was a painstaking search, tracing old records, defunct businesses, and forgotten addresses. Finally, after weeks of relentless investigation, they located a decrepit, almost abandoned orphanage in a forgotten corner of a neighboring state. Its records were sparse, but a faded entry, under a pseudonym matching a detail from Evelyn's confession, confirmed Lily Blackwood's placement there decades ago. The orphanage director, now elderly and racked with guilt, provided a tearful testimony, confirming Evelyn's manipulation and the coercion by Silas Croft. The search then narrowed to Silas Croft. He was eventually found living a quiet, unremarkable life, haunted by his past, confronted with the overwhelming evidence and the threat of prosecution. Croft confessed his role in separating Lily from her family and placing her in the orphanage. He revealed Lily's assumed name and the last known location she had gone to after she turned 18 and left the orphanage, a small coastal town, miles away. The news that Lily Blackwood might still be alive sent a surge of hope through Eleanor. For so long, her quest had been about uncovering a past tragedy. Now, it was about finding a living person, a survivor. Detective Reynolds' team, armed with this new information, raced against time. Finally, after a painstaking search, Lily Blackwood, now in her 80s, was found. She had lived a quiet, unassuming life, never knowing the full truth of her past, believing her family had simply abandoned her. The shock of being reunited with her identity, the truth of her confinement, and the revelation of Evelyn Thorne's monstrous betrayal was immense. It was a reunion tinged with profound sorrow for a stolen childhood, but also with an overwhelming sense of validation and long-awaited closure. Lily, a testament to the human spirit's resilience, finally had answers. Evelyn Thorne's trial was highly publicized. Eleanor's testimony, recounting Shadow's pivotal role in unearthing the secret, captured the public's imagination. Mr. Harrison provided the historical context, and Detective Reynolds presented the irrefutable evidence. Lily Blackwood herself, frail but firm, gave a powerful victim impact statement, detailing the years of confinement and her forced separation from her family. Evelyn Thorne, stripped of her public facade, was convicted on all counts. Her sentence ensured she would spend the remainder of her life in prison, facing the true consequences of her avarice and cruelty. Justice, though slow, had arrived with an undeniable force. With the legal battles behind them, Eleanor and Shadow found a newfound peace. Shadow, fully recovered and thriving, was no longer the haunted, timid dog. His coat gleamed, his eyes shone with intelligence, and his tail wagged with a joyful exuberance that Eleanor had longed to see. He had found his purpose, and in doing so, had helped Eleanor find hers. Eleanor, deeply affected by Lily's story and the silent suffering of so many forgotten victims, decided to dedicate her life to a new cause. She established the Lily Blackwood Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to investigating unsolved cold cases involving missing or exploited children, particularly those where powerful individuals might have been involved in a cover-up. She utilized her meticulous research skills, her newfound connections with law enforcement, and her deep empathy. Shadow, with his incredible intuition and unwavering loyalty, became the Foundation's unofficial mascot, a living symbol of hope and the power of silent testimony. He often accompanied Eleanor to public awareness events, his calm presence a comforting balm to those who had suffered. The house, once a silent keeper of dark secrets, was transformed. Eleanor and Lily, now a regular presence in each other's lives, worked together to restore it. They opened up the walled-off cellar compartment, turning it into a small, quiet memorial to Lily's lost childhood, a space for reflection and remembrance. The backyard, once a place of mysterious obsession for Shadow, became a vibrant garden, a symbol of new life and growth. Eleanor and Shadow's story became a beacon of inspiration, shared across the nation. It highlighted the profound bond between humans and animals, the ability of kindness to heal deep wounds, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Eleanor, who had once felt lost, had found profound purpose. Lily, who had been forgotten, had found her voice and her family. And Shadow, the broken-hearted rescue dog, had found his true home, his purpose, and the unconditional love he so desperately deserved. They were an extraordinary family, forged in adversity, bound by an unwavering commitment to truth and compassion, and forever connected by the buried secret that had brought them all together. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this incredible story of justice, resilience, and an unbreakable bond between a woman and her loyal dog, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Stay with us for the next captivating tale. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore, more secrets to uncover. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below.